Welcome back to our fifth session of Hobbit Camp 2018. This is another longer reading, and again, if you guys have been keeping up with this, great work, because I'm finding this is a lot of reading. This is the chapters 8 and 9, Flies and Spiders, and Barrels Out of Bond. Our themes for today, we're looking at Mirkwood and magic. We are told by Beorn, we're told by Gandalf, stay on the path, and of course, that proves to be impossible for the dwarves and for Bilbo. What happens when they leave the path? And looking at Bilbo in these chapters, we're going to see that he continues to grow as a character. So we're going to try to look for some of the ways in which he is developing and growing. Activities for today. Journaling as always, this time again, magic, Mirkwood, Bilbo's heroics, and the elves that we meet. How do they compare with other characters that we've been encountering along this way? Drawings of the spiders, Sting, the Elvenking, and his caves. You can practice your burglaring skills like Bilbo does. You can create some keys. Maybe you still have the ones you made back from the first session, and taking those without anyone seeing you. You can try bundling up dwarves like the spiders do. That's a little crafting activity, and then launching the barrels. So those dwarves, man, they have a hard time in this reading for today. But some fun activities, I think, that go with this. So I hope that you're enjoying these journaling and drawing and more active ways of participating. Feel free to send questions at any time during this session or whenever you get around to watching it. You can email us, and we look forward to hearing from you. So on into the forest here. They walked in single file. The entrance to the path was like a sort of arch leading into a gloomy tunnel made by two great trees that leant together, too old and strangled with ivy and hung with lichen to bear more than a few blackened leaves. The path itself was narrow and wound in and out among the trunks. Soon the light at the gate was like a little bright hole, far behind, and the quiet was so deep that their feet seemed to thump along while all the trees leaned over them and listened. As their eyes became used to the dimness, they could see a little way to either side in a sort of darkened green glimmer. Occasionally, a slender beam of sun that had the luck to slip in through some opening in the leaves far above, and still more luck in not being caught in the tangled boughs and matted twigs beneath, stabbed down thin and bright before them. But this was seldom, and it soon ceased altogether. So we're entering into this forest. It has a kind of archway formed by the trees themselves. This is a little image that you'll see come back time and again in Tolkien's writing, the more that you read. He loves this idea that the trees form a kind of arch, and the forest then is a place of nature, right, of darkness, but also a place that has some kind of element of it has this path, right? And so that means that there's people. And the way that the trees lean together, making an arch, suggests that the forest itself has accommodated to the people that pass through it. So there is some kind of balance here, but it's very, very dangerous to go off the path, right? Because then you're at the mercy of the trees and the things that live in them. So the light that comes through, at first there's a little bit that makes it through, and with luck, right, makes it all the way to the forest floor, but pretty soon that luck runs out, we see. No more are there beams of light that reach the floor. We also begin to encounter the forest's perils before very long. So they were still standing over him, cursing their ill luck and Bombur's clumsiness, and lamenting the loss of the boat, which made it impossible for them to go back and look for the heart, when they became aware of the dim blowing of horns in the wood, and the sound as of dogs baying far off. Then they all fell silent, and as they sat, it seemed they could hear the noise of a great hunt going by to the north of the path, though they saw no sign of it. There they sat for a long while and did not dare to make a move. Bombur slept on with a smile on his fat face, as if he no longer cared for all the troubles that vexed them. Suddenly, on the path ahead appeared some white deer, hind and fawns, as snowy white as the heart had been dark. They glimmered in the shadows. Before Thorin could cry out, 3 of the dwarfs had leaped to their feet and loosed off arrows from their bows. None seemed to find their mark. The deer turned and vanished in the trees as silently as they had come, and in vain the dwarves shot their arrows after them. So what has just happened here is that they come to the stream that Beorn had warned them about, the enchanted stream. Fortunately enough, Bilbo spied the boat on the other side, and Fili managed to snag it with a hook and pull it across so that they could go back and forth with that rope across the stream and the boat. But last of all came Bombur, and this hart, like a deer, came running out of the woods and leapt across the stream. Thorin shot it with an arrow, brought it down on the other side, but in so doing, in it crossing and running through the dwarves, it knocked Bombur backwards into the stream, and they had to rescue him. So some of the perils of the forest, then, the dangers here. First of all, the stream, right? But also the temptation of hunting seems to be a big danger. The animals themselves are not, the deer are not particularly dangerous in themselves, but they do manage to scatter and distract the dwarves, and they do knock over Bombur into the stream. So the combination of those two things. And then whoever it is, of course, that's hunting off the path, you might imagine the dwarves and Bilbo are quite afraid of encountering those people. So the dwarves are not helpless, of course, right? They have some skills. They can recover the boat with their hook. They can bring down a deer. Thorin is a good shot with the bow, it looks like. But their own skills with the bows prove to be a problem too, because they fire all their arrows in their eagerness there, right? So now the bows are useless. They can't defend themselves if they do encounter anything even more dangerous than this. And of course, Bombur is out of commission for the moment, sleeping with a smile on his face. So they're beginning to despair, right? They're running out of food, running out of water. They come down into a low part of the forest, and they decide to send Bilbo to climb a tree and see what's all around. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of leaves, and then he found spiders all right, but they were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarves shouting up at him from far below, but he could not answer, only hold on and blink. The sun was shining brilliantly, and it was a long while before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all round him a sea of dark green, ruffled here and there by the breeze. And there were everywhere hundreds of butterflies. I expect they were a kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the tops of oak woods. But these were not purple at all. They were a dark, velvety black without any markings to be seen. He looked at the black emperors for a long time and enjoyed the feel of the breeze in his hair and on his face. But at length the cries of the dwarves, who were now simply stamping with impatience down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. Gaze as much as he might, he could see no end of the trees and the leaves in any direction. His heart, that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the feel of the wind, sank back into his toes. There was no food to go back down below. In the darkness of the forest, part of the greatest danger of this place is that you can't see very far ahead. You have no sense of where you are in this great expanse of trees. And so your own hopes and your own wishes start to become your own worst enemy. You start to lose patience, right? As we see with the dwarves here. Even in the short time that Bilbo's up in the tree, they are losing patience. And they sent him up there to get a look around because they couldn't bear to just keep walking. Right? The narrator points out, well, because they're in this kind of valley, if only they were up a little higher, they would have seen that the trees were ending before too long. If they had just kept on going on the path, they were nearly there, right? But they become impatient. They waste time sending Bilbo up the tree. They start fighting amongst themselves, and they're tired of carrying Bombur along, and it's all becoming harder and harder to just stick to what they know is the right thing to do, to stay on the path. Uh, but luckily enough for Bilbo, he gets a chance to see the sun, right? So in all that dimness and stillness of the woods, he was starting to lose hope himself. But he gets this kind of refreshment by going up the tree tops and looking over. And what does he find up there but life, right? Little spiders, manageable ones, and butterflies. These black emperors, as they call them, are creatures of the forest, which are harmless, which are even beautiful once you see them in the right light. And so that's kind of a neat connection, I think, between this place that, again, seems like nature at its darkest. Well, it also includes this element of goodness and beauty up at the top of the trees. Bilbo, of course, is the only one who gets to see it, and then shortly he has to go back down uh, and deal with the dwarves uh, and no food and no food. So one good thing, maybe, Bombur wakes up finally. He woke up suddenly and sat up scratching his head. He could not make out where he was at all, nor why he felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started their journey that May morning long ago. The last thing that he remembered was the party at the Hobbit's house, and they had great difficulty in making him believe their tale of all the many adventures they had had since. When he had heard that there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept, for he felt very weak and wobbly in the legs. "Why did I ever wake up?" he cried. "I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed I was walking in a forest, rather like this one, only lit with torches on the trees and lamps swinging from the branches, and fires burning on the ground, and there was a great feast going on forever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was a merry singing, and I could not count or describe the things there were to eat and drink." Oh, so just what the doors want to hear about, right? The food that they can't have. Poor Bombur, though, has forgotten everything. So that enchantment on the stream is quite powerful. If he has kind of hit the reset on this whole journey since May, and now it's practically autumn, we're told, right? It's getting chilly. The leaves are starting to change. And Bombur falling in that river and having this dream uh, connects us with an idea that's, again, one that Tolkien would be familiar with as a scholar and as a teacher of old fairy tales and legends and languages. This idea that there's certain magical boundaries, right, which are dangerous to cross, perilous in his word. The perilous realm that they are in here is magical and beautiful. This idea of having a feast which you can't actually reach, right? Is a very old one and is connected with fairies. So we saw back at chapter 1 the idea that there was a fairy wife somewhere in Bilbo's parentage, farther back among his ancestors on the Took side, and fairy is another word for elf. And as Tolkien goes on in the story, he just uses elf rather than fairy. But the idea that there's some kind of magic associated with this feast in the magical woods, beyond the magical stream, this is one that he would find in lots and lots of fairy tales, like the Brothers Grimm, right? Uh, was Bombur really seeing the elves under the enchantment of the water, or was it just a dream? He seems to think that it was a dream worth having and one that he is perfectly happy to go back to. That seems to be his take on it, that whether it's real or not, he wants to be in that place rather than the dismal one that he wakes up to. The idea that there could be an illusion or an enchantment that is more wonderful than real life is a big part of fairy tales and part of their danger too, right? Because what if you get lost in that illusion and you don't want to come back to the real world? That's a real problem. And as we'll see, there is some truth to his dreams. So the feast, right? They're starting to lose hope. Well, they have been for a while. They finally see some fires, some lights. That turned out so well before with the trolls, right? So let's go run up to those again. They leave the path, and here's the feast. The smell of the roast meats was so enchanting that, without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring with the one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out as if by magic. Somebody kicked the fire and it went up in rockets and glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a completely lightless dark, and they could not even find one another, not for a long time at any rate. After blundering frantically in the gloom, falling over logs, bumping crash into trees, and shouting and calling till they must have waked everything in the forest for miles, at last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by touch. By that time they had, of course, quite forgotten in what direction the path lay, and they were all hopelessly lost, at least till morning. So they all seem to be awake as far as they can tell, and they do see a feast and they smell it, and they can't help. Their hunger drives them to enter and beg for food, and it goes away as soon as they step in. It vanishes. The sparks go up, and it becomes completely dark. The suggestion here, I guess, is that as dark as it has been on the path, it's even darker once they leave it, right? They can't even see one another or find out where they are except by touch, right? And so we get this kind of contrast between their loud stumbling around and their sense of touch, and the beautiful vision and the beautiful smells, right? So these senses are kind of separated from each other. So they're lost in the forest. They don't even know which way is up. Essentially they are completely disoriented and completely at a loss here. It's the first time I think that they're really hopeless. They could just reach out and touch the feast, and then it disappeared as if by magic, right? They've been betrayed by something that looked so fun and so beautiful, and so what a letdown! What a letdown! Now this happens 2 more times, and after the third one, Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, and calling, Dory, Nori, Ori, Oin, Gloin, Litly, sorry, that should be Philly, Killy, Bombur, Biffer, Bofford, Wallin, Balin, Thorin, Oakenshield, while people he could not see or feel were doing the same all around him, with an occasional Bilbo thrown in. But the cries of the others got steadily further and fainter, and though after a while it seemed to him they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise at last died right away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. That was one of his most miserable moments, but he soon made up his mind that it was no good trying to do anything till day came with some little light, and quite useless to go blundering about tiring himself out with no hope of any breakfast to revive him. So he sat down with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole with its beautiful pantries. He was deep in thoughts of bacon and eggs and toast and butter when he felt something touch him. Something like a strong, sticky string was against his left hand, and when he tried to move, he found that its legs were already wrapped in the same stuff, so that when he got up, he fell right over. So things go from bad to worse here. Not only have they failed to reach the feast and seemingly caused it to disappear each time that they step into the ring of light, but now they become scattered from one another. They can't even come back together by touch, right? And their hollering and their loud noises not only have woken up everything dangerous in the woods, but they become more and more distant from one another, become more disoriented, lost in complete silence and darkness. So alone again. Not the first time that Bilbo's been alone, but again, somehow this one's even worse, right? Because he was just that close. He didn't know it, but he was close to getting out of the woods, and he did think he was close to getting some food finally, and then it disappeared, and all his friends disappeared. So again, that tantalizing nearness to the thing that he wants makes it even worse when he instead gets left alone in silence and darkness. And that's not the end of it, right? What does he do when he's alone? Thinks about home, all the good things to eat, which he can finally, appreciate in a new way, but it makes it no less far from him, makes him no less hungry. And what brings him out of his thinking this time is not drawing his sword, but feeling something else, trying to capture him, trying to catch him. Not Gollum this time, no, but the web of the spiders, right? So we'll see how our burglar responds to this this next great challenge, right? We saw that he responded really well last time, used his wits in the riddle game, and managed to escape from Gollum using his ring. This time, it's the sword, the knife that comes to the rescue. Then the great spider, who had been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abominable threads round and round him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands. It was trying to poison him to keep him quiet, as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword and drew it out. Then the spider jumped back, and he had time to cut his legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack. The spider evidently was not used to things that carried such stings at their sides, or it would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and stuck it with his sword right in the eyes. Then it went mad and leaped and danced and flung out its legs in horrible jerks until he killed it with another stroke. And then it fell down and remembered, and then he fell down, and remembered nothing more for a long while. There was the usual dim, gray light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade was stained black. Somehow the killing of the great spider, all alone by himself in the dark without the help of the wizard or the dwarves or of anyone else, made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt a different person, much fiercer and bolder in spite of an empty stomach, as he wiped his sword on the grass and put it back in sheath. "I will give you a name," he said to it, "and I shall call you Sting." So this moment is highlighted here, that it makes a big difference to Mr. Baggins. What about this moment is so important to him? What does he manage to do? And what about the way that he manages to do it is such a big leap, big development for Bilbo here. You might remember, as you're thinking about that, as you're sending in your thoughts, you might remember that they've been seeing these spider webs all along, and they've been seeing these eyes peer at them out of the dark. Right, so this isn't coming as a complete surprise here, but again, it's coming on the heels of this attempt to get into the magic circle of fire, right, of light, of warmth, of food. So that's when they're most vulnerable under that enchantment, under that magic wish that they have. A couple of things that seem really important in this moment. Again, Bilbo sort of forgets that he has this sword. He's using his hands at first, but then once he draws it, he seems to know what to do, right? He goes on the attack, right? So that's a big turning point for Bilbo. He showed pity towards Gollum before. He didn't actually use the sword. He only had it as defense to keep Gollum away, but he didn't actually attack Gollum with it. So this is a big step for him, and it seems to really wear him out. After he does it, after he kills the spider, he kind of goes into a faint. You know, it's not quite the same thing as calling out "struck by lightning," struck by lightning. No, but it seems to overwhelm him, and that makes sense. But when he comes to, he feels different. He feels fierce and bold, and he can deal with the empty stomach, right? He cleans off the sword and puts it away and names it. And so, like we saw before, naming something, right? Going from somebody to Beorn is a big step, right? Now he's somebody that you can interact with and you can get help from. He's not just a mysterious somebody. Well, it's sort of the same with this sword. He gives it this kind of personality, and it's now something that he is not likely to forget, right? That he has, and he knows how to use it now. So the name Sting, right, seems like a big turning point for Bilbo. Of course, he is still alone, right? But in a sense, he's less alone than he was before. He has Sting with him, and he himself has grown into a more formidable, a more powerful character as a result. Now he's bemoaning his luck here. Oh gosh, yeah. So a good comment here. So the narrator doesn't call him Bilbo in this moment. He's called Mr. Baggins. Does this make him sound more important? Sure. Yeah, I think so. From this paragraph, Bilbo came at it, to this paragraph, a great difference to Mr. Baggins. Right? There's a level of formality, importance to that. Yeah, I think so. And it doesn't seem to be in the joking way that we hear sometimes with Thorin, especially using his important sounding language. But it seems like a serious step for Bilbo Baggins. Yes. So he bemoans his fate here. Oh, why did we not remember Beorn's advice and Gandalf's? He lamented. What a mess we are in now. I only wish it was we. It is horrible being all alone. In the end, he made as good a guess as he could at the direction from which the cries for help had come in the night, and by luck, he was born with a good share of it, he guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever at quietness, especially in woods, as I have already told you. Also, Bilbo had slipped on his ring before he started. That is why the spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. So Bilbo keeps his head, right? He doesn't completely lose hope here. He is lucky, and he has been lucky all along in guessing the direction that he should go now. But he's also got more than luck, right? Of course, he's got Sting, and he's got the magic ring, so that the spiders don't see him. He's got his Hobbit sneakiness, his Hobbit quietness and cleverness, right? And that, again, is something that comes from inside of him, right? And now he's making use of it in a way he hasn't before, to sneak up on his enemies, to rescue his friends. So remember, way back, it was the dwarves who were coming to rescue him from the trolls, and Gandalf, of course, rescued them then, and in the goblin caves, it was Gandalf again rescuing them. The eagles have rescued them. So we've seen this kind of pattern, but now it's Bilbo who's in the role of the rescuer, right? The hero, in a way, using his burglarious skills. He also, so he's named his sword Sting, given it a name. He's going to use his power of language here too, to sing and distract the spiders and lead them away from his friends so they can escape. Bilbo's first song of a long and wonderful career as a poet and singer. Here we go. Old fat spider spinning in a tree. Old fat spider can't see me. Attercop, won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look for me. Old Tom Noddy, all big body. Old Tom Noddy can't spy me. Attercop, down you drop. You'll never catch me up your tree. Not very good, perhaps, but then you must remember that he had to make it up himself on the spur of a very awkward moment. It did what he wanted anyway. As he sang, he threw some more stones and stamped. Practically all the spiders in the place came after him. Some dropped to the ground, others raced along the branches, swung from tree to tree, or cast new ropes across the dark spaces. They made for his noise far quicker than he had expected. They were frightfully angry. Quite apart from the stones, no spider has ever liked being called Attercop, and Tom Naughty, of course, is insulting to anybody. So Bilbo calls them some very rude names here for spiders. What is it the trolls say? Very rude and appropriate, fitting names. Yeah. So some name calling, but he also throws stones, right? He's quite dangerous with a stone, as we're told. He's practiced lots of throwing games and sports back among his friends, and so he's got some skill. Maybe he can't throw quite as far as or as accurately as the younger dwarves, right? Philly and Killy, who threw and caught the boat and brought it over. But he's throwing plenty good enough to bring down some spiders here, get their attention, lead them away from the dwarves. The narrator points out, and I think it's kind of funny here, points out that it's not a very good song. All right, so this is the first sort of criticism of this kind, aesthetic criticism, right? How beautiful, how funny, or sorry, how well made the songs are. So again, the narrator throws in this little reminder, though, right? Again, he's in a really difficult situation, so let's cut him some slack here, right? Like the narrator likes to remind us, we're safe at home. Bilbo, of course, is in great danger and is doing the best he can on the spot. Yeah, so someone pointing out here, maybe Gandalf could sense Bilbo was born with a good share of luck, and that is why he chose Bilbo. Yeah. There seems to be more and more evidence as we're going along for what Gandalf might have been thinking back there in the beginning of chapter 1 when he came and he put the sign on Bilbo's door and chose him for the adventure. It sounds like Gandalf knows something about Bilbo's character that maybe Bilbo didn't know himself at the time, right? That's coming out in the course of these dangerous adventures, right? He's inspired here to finally let loose with a poem, right? We're told in the beginning, he's not totally prosy, right? He's got some poetry in him when he's talking about the fireworks that's coming out a little bit. Well, it's coming out in a much bigger way here. He's got this kind of creativity, this cleverness. Of course, he's sneaky and skilled with throwing stones. He's got the magic ring, right? What luck to find that and use it. And the elven blade, right, that they found by luck in the troll's cave. So lots of little hints and pieces here that there's something more to Bilbo than he himself knew. And it wouldn't put it past Gandalf being able to see that, being able, under his bushy eyebrows, Gandalf sees everything, it seems like. So they rescue, the dwarves that Bilbo has rescued, help rescue the others. All 12 of the dwarves are there, they think, along with Bilbo Baggins. There they lay for some time, puffing and panting, but very soon they began to ask questions. They had to have the whole vanishing business carefully explained, and finding the ring interested them so much that for a while they forgot their own troubles. Balin in particular insisted on having the Gollum story, riddles and all, told all over again, with the ring in its proper place. But after a time, the light began to fail, and then other questions were asked. Where were they, and where was their path, and where was there any food, and what were they going to do next? These questions they asked over and over again, and it was from little Bilbo that they seemed to expect to get the answers. From which you can see that they had changed their opinion of Mr. Baggins very much, and had begun to have a great respect for him, as Gandalf said they would. Indeed, they really expected him to think of some wonderful plan for helping them, and were not merely grumbling. They knew only too well that they would soon all have been dead if it had not been for the Hobbit. And they thanked him many times. Some of them even got up and bowed right to the ground before him, till they fell over with the effort, and could not get on their legs again for some time. Knowing the truth about the vanishing did not lessen their opinion of Bilbo at all, for they saw that he had some wits, as well as luck and a magic ring, and all three are very useful possessions. In fact, they praised him so much that Bilbo began to feel there really was something of a bold adventurer about himself after all, though he would have felt a lot bolder still if there had been anything to eat. All right, so we get both sides of him coming out really strongly here, right? He's gained some things. He's gone on this adventure. The Took is strong, right? In this moment, he's like, oh yeah, I'm quite the bold adventurer. But on the other hand, the Baggins, common sense, well, I'd feel a little bolder if I had something to eat, right? So he's progressing in these ways that are still maintaining a kind of balance. Both are growing stronger. The Took side, the adventurous side, and the Baggins, the practical, the level-headed. So they do finally find out about the magic ring, and they don't hold it against him or Gandalf, it seems, for hiding that in the first place. They consider that to be showing wits, right? Quite intelligent to keep that sort of thing hidden and to use it so wisely. So no hard feelings, it sounds like. All right. Now we finally find out who's feasting here in the woods. The feasting people were Wood-elves, of course. These are not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is a distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the West and were more dangerous and less wise, for most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to faerie in the West. They're the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went and lived for ages and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things, before some came back into the wide world. In the wide world the Wood-elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars, and they wandered in the great forests that grew tall in lands that are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt or to ride and run over the open lands by moonlight or starlight, and after the coming of men they took ever more and more to the gloaming and the dusk, twilight. Still, elves they were and remain, and that is, good people. So capital letters for that. And a capital F and a funny spelling there for fairy in the West. So again, that word fairy in this case means like the home of the fairies, or where they come from, the elves, where they dwell, where they live forever out of reach of mortals, right? This is again an old idea that Tolkien is very, very fond of, and in making up his stories, he begins to bring it in little ways, right? We met the elves of Rivendell before. Those are some of the descendants of people who did go to faerie in the West, right? So there's different kinds of elves that have apparently some different levels of danger and wisdom about them. These ones, we're told, have never been to the home, right, of faerie. They nevertheless have very powerful magic, right, and are capable, it seems, of tricking, of capturing, of deceiving, but also we're told they're good, right? So they, as dangerous, as tricky as they might be, these are still elves, and so good people. The description here comes because they've captured Thorin, right? They've brought him back to their palace here and are interrogating him. We got a question back about the spiders. Yes, does giant spider mean like the king spider? Says Katie. So we hear the spiders talking to each other. We hear that they, like the trolls, like the goblins, plan on eating the dwarves. And like Gollum, right? So these kind of monsters, they do seem to be more dangerous than any of the other monsters that we've met so far, right? This is the closest the dwarves have coming to being being eaten finally, at long last. But to call it the king spider, it doesn't seem like any one of the spiders is really in charge, right? They kind of work as a big clump. And just chase Bilbo around. None of them seem to be smart enough or have the leadership to like try to create some strategy or something here. There is that one older, really nasty spider that stays behind and is going to eat while the other ones are chasing Bilbo around. Yeah, I don't know about a king spider though. If you do read more Tolkien, you will see that there is maybe such a thing as a king spider back in his other stories. So it's a good question. We don't meet the king spider here. All of the spiders, right, are big and scary. It seems like pretty much equally. But there is an elven king. Okay, so the palace was also the dungeon of his prisoners. So to the cave they dragged Thorin, none too gently, for they did not love dwarves, and thought he was an enemy. In ancient days they had had wars with some of the dwarves, whom they accused of stealing their treasure. It is only fair to say that the dwarves gave a different account, and said they only took what was their due, for the elf king had bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver, especially, and had afterwards refused to give them their pay. If the elf king had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially for silver and white gems. And though his hoard was rich, he was ever eager for more, since he had not yet as great a treasure as other elf lords of old. His people neither mined nor worked metals or jewels, nor did they bother much with trade or with tilling the earth. All this was well known to every dwarf, though Thorin's family had had nothing to do with the old quarrel I have spoken of. Consequently, Thorin was angry at their treatment of him when they took their spell off him and he came to his senses, and also he was determined that no word of gold or jewels should be dragged out of him. So there's some stuff that the dwarves and elves have in common here, right? They love beautiful things. Again, the dwarves make them, it seems, and mine them, whereas these elves at least don't. There was some big war in the past, maybe a little bit ironic, right? Because we saw that elves hate goblins and dwarves hate goblins, but elves and dwarves nevertheless don't quite get along either, it seems. And they have a dispute over something that happened long ago with some treasure. Okay, so again, the thing that they both love becomes the thing that they both fight about, and that's quite a dilemma, actually. Now, Thorin personally is not involved in this fight, right? So he doesn't see why they're treating him this way. From his perspective, he's just been trying to get help, but from their perspective, he's an intruder, right? And stirring up the spiders and causing all kinds of problems when the elves are out there trying to have their party, right? So they both see it a little differently, to say the least. Okay. What have we done, O king? Said Balin, who was the eldest left. Is it a crime to be lost in the forest, to be hungry and thirsty, to be trapped by spiders? Are the spiders your tame beasts or your pets, if killing them makes you so angry? Such a question, of course, made the king angrier than ever, and he answered, It is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. Do you forget that you were in my kingdom, using the road that my people made? Do you not 3 times pursue and trouble my people in the forest, and rouse the spiders with your riot and clamor? After all the disturbance you have made, I have a right to know what brings you here, and if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in prison until you have learned sense and manners. Okay. So some strong language on both sides, I think it's fair to say, right? This is the point at which all the other dwarves have been captured, but Bilbo hides with his ring and sneaks after them into the palace, and so he's listening and sees what's going on. The dwarves, again, they see it as very unfair treatment, right? They haven't done anything wrong. The elves see it as perfectly justified, and you notice there, they know that something is going on here. So they might not be as wise as the elves of Rivendell, who know exactly what's going on, seems like somehow, know about the whole journey, and about Bilbo, of course, being on it, and have a great laugh at it. No, these elves are serious, and they want to know, so what are these dwarves doing in this place? Why are they on our path? They might suspect, but they're not sure yet, that there could be some treasure involved. Okay, so they're going to keep them in prison until they learn sense. Okay, quite the punishment, quite the harsh timeout for the dwarves here. And poor Bilbo, right? I'm like a burglar that can't get away, but must go on miserably burgling the same house day after day. This is the dreariest and dullest part of all this wretched, tiresome, uncomfortable adventure. I wish I was back in my hobbit hole, by my own warm fireside with the lamp shining. He often wished, too, that he could get a message for help sent to the wizard, but that, of course, was quite impossible. And he soon realized that if anything was to be done, it would have to be done by Mr. Baggins, alone and unaided. Eventually, after a week or 2 of this sneaking sort of life, by watching and following the guards and taking what chances he could, he managed to find out where each dwarf was kept. He found all their 12 cells in different parts of the palace, and after a time he got to know his way about very well. What was his surprise one day to overhear some of the guards talking, to learn there was another dwarf in prison too, in a specially deep, dark place. He guessed at once, of course, that that was Thorin, and after a while he found that his guess was right. At last, after many difficulties, he managed to find the place when no one was about and to have a word with the chief of the dwarves. So of course his first thought is, I want to be back home. I wish I was home, right? He wishes also to get help, right, from Gandalf, right? So he's still thinking on these kind of old lines. First, want to be back home. Second, someone else is going to help and rescue us, right? But then he sees that it's up to him. So again, using his wits, keeping up his hopes as much as possible. They find Thorin at last. They thought he was lost, right? Once they counted and figured out there was someone missing. But he's here, right? And so they hatch a plan. Well, Bilbo comes up with a plan. So it was that Bilbo was able to take secretly Thorin's message to each of the other imprisoned dwarves, telling them that Thorin, their chief, was also in prison close at hand, that no one was to reveal their errand to the king, not yet, not before Thorin gave the word. For Thorin had taken heart again, hearing how the Hobbit had rescued his companions from the spiders, and was determined once more not to ransom himself with promises to the king of a share in the treasure, until all hope of escaping in any other way had disappeared. Until, in fact, the remarkable Mr. Invisible Baggins, of whom he began to have a very high opinion indeed, had altogether failed to think of something clever. The other dwarves quite agreed when they got the message. They all thought in their own shares in the treasure, which they quite regarded as theirs in spite of their plight and the still unconquered dragon, would suffer seriously if the Wood-elves claimed part of it. They all trusted Bilbo. Just what Gandalf had said would happen, you see. Perhaps that was part of his reason for going off and leaving them. Right? So we're getting more explanation here, more ways to think about this dangerous situation. Well, you can look at it as something bad, that Gandalf really should have stayed to help, right? But you can look at it too, that what Gandalf said is coming true, right? It's a chance for Bilbo to come into his own as a leader, as Mr. Invisible Baggins. So he gets kind of like secret identity here. All the dwarves believe in him, trust in him. They know that he'll come up with a way to get out of this. And it seems that Gandalf trusted this too, right? And so finally Bilbo, sure enough, does come through. And it was partly his wits, his magic ring, but also partly luck. So now come with me, he said, and taste the new wine that has just come in. I shall be hard at work tonight clearing the cellars of the empty wood, so let us have a drink first to help the labor. Very good, laughed the chief of the guards. I'll taste with you and see if it is fit for the king's table. There's a feast tonight, and it would not do to send up poor stuff. When he heard this, Bilbo was all in a flutter, for he saw that luck was with him, and he had a chance at once to try his desperate plan. He followed the two elves until they entered a small cellar and sat down at a table on which two large flagons were set. Soon they began to drink and laugh merrily. Luck of an unusual kind was with Bilbo then. It must be potent wine to make a wood elf drowsy, but this wine, it would seem, was the heady vintage of the great gardens of Dorwinion, not meant for his soldiers or his servants, but for the king's feasts only, and for smaller bowls, not for the butler's great flagons. Right, so they're really quaffing, they're really drinking the wine. It makes them drowsy and laugh and finally fall asleep, right? And that seems to be a really unusual sort of thing, right? So not only did Bilbo's luck lead him straight to the dwarves when they were caught by the spiders, but now his luck has provided this chance, this opportunity, right? As he gets the idea for how to escape, he gets a chance to try it out, right? Tonight's the night that they are going to clear the old wood from the cellars. What does that mean? Well, barrels, right? So Bilbo loads the dwarves into the barrels, and then the elves come along and start to chuck the barrels into the water to float down the stream to the river and on their way. Yeah, so pointing out here, Sharon, Bilbo is lucky again, but he has to be ready to take advantage of it. Absolutely, right? So we can say luck all we want, but it doesn't mean much if the character, especially Bilbo in this case, isn't ready to act on it, right? So there's this kind of combination there of a situation that seems lucky, but also the character being ready, having taken on this responsibility to act, to make the decision, to be a leader, right? And here's the song that the elves sing as they go. As I read this one out loud, this is probably the last thing that we'll really touch on today. Think about the other song about the wind from yesterday, from our last session. So, down the swift dark stream you go, back to lands you once did know. Leave the halls and caverns deep, leave the northern mountains steep, where the forest wide and dim stoops in shadow gray and grim. Float beyond the world of trees, out into the whispering breeze, past the rushes, past the reeds, past the marshes' waving weeds, through the mist that riseth white, up from the mere and pool at night. Follow, follow stars that leap up the heavens cold and steep. Turn when dawn comes overland, over rapid, over sand, south away and south away. Seek the sunlight and the day, back to pasture, back to mead where the kine and oxen feed, back to gardens on the hills, where the berry swells and fills under sunlight, under day, south away and south away. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to lands you once did know. So the song here is like the wind song, at least in the sense that it travels, right? Like the wind was going on this journey, same way the barrels are going on this journey too, right? But the big difference for me, at least, is that wind, again, is something light and something up high and sort of detached from the world. It goes fast. And the barrels go fast too, but they're low. They're down on the river, right, at the lowest point, the water level, and bobbing along, right? So there's something a little different about those two ways of thinking about the journey, right? Sometimes it feels like the dwarves are flying along like the wind, like when the eagles carry them, and sometimes, kind of literally, they're on the low side of things, right? Either down in the dungeons or in the cave, or in this case, they're actually bobbing along in the barrels. If the song is sung by elves, so great comment here, a great question. If the song is sung by elves, is it a kind of enchantment on the barrels to make sure they get back to where they belong? Yeah, the songs seem to have a power, right? Even Gandalf, remember up in the treetop, he was afraid when he heard the goblins singing, and he had to combat with his own words. This song seems to have a pretty strong effect too, because sure enough, all the barrels, even with their heavy load, do make it down the river and stay together long enough to get collected. So yeah, there seems to be some enchantment here. What they sing does come true, and the idea here that you're going back home, back to lands you once did know, right? So these barrels came, were used, and now are being sent back. That again has a connection to the journey, right? Because this journey, we're told in the very title of the story, is a there and back again kind of story, right? So this song, although it's talking about the barrels going back to their home, for Bilbo, it might make him think again of his home and his desire to go back once he gets done with his adventure. We'll see if he makes it home. Especially the line here, the gardens on the hills. Gardens on the hills, that sounds a lot like his hobbit hole in the hill back home. Now, I did want to give you your Tolkien trivia for today, and I think I forgot to give you a little tidbit of trivia for yesterday, so we'll try to make up for that real quick here. One of the things that Tolkien worked on, besides writing stories and besides teaching legends and old languages and things, Tolkien actually worked on the Oxford English Dictionary, the big dictionary that it tells you a lot about not only what words mean, but if you look it up, you can look this up online. It'll tell you about where the word comes from as well, which is really, really neat. And it's something that Tolkien was really interested in, right? Where do words come from? How does language grow and change over time, right? So little tidbit, he apparently worked on the letter W in the dictionary. He he says that of that time in his life that he learned more doing that than anything else in his career. So that's pretty amazing because he knew an awful lot. So that's really saying something. So yeah, working on the letter W in the Oxford English Dictionary. Okay, and then a little tidbit for today, a little trivia about the story. So we already saw that there was that thing that he changed. The original riddle story, right, has Bilbo and Gollum parting on a much more friendly basis, right, where Gollum really was trying to give Bilbo a present, right, of the ring, and then that's apparently the story that he originally wrote, but then goes back and changes it later to make Gollum a little more, a little more like the Gollum that we meet in the Lord of the Rings, and to make the ring, right, more important than just a magic ring. Well, so he changed something else in this part of the story, apparently. He originally had Bilbo using the spider web as a thread or a clue. That's the old meaning of the word clue, is a thread that leads you through a maze, right? So he used that in the original version of the story. That was how Bilbo found his way to where the dwarves were being kept. He followed the spider web. When he revises it here, Tolkien makes it even more lucky, right? There isn't really a reason aside from Bilbo having a lot of luck. That's how he finds his friends. So as Tolkien revises the story, he makes luck more of a big thing, more of a big part of the story. So you might want to be thinking about why or what that might do to the story, right? What effect does it have making that change? So we've been looking at luck and what Bilbo gains, what he already has, his Baggins, his Tookside on this adventure. We'll kind of try to recap that after the weekend when we pick up in chapters 10 and 11. We'll kind of recap the first week here of class. So you got a chance here to catch up on your reading. You'll see that we've already read well over half the book, right? So next week, the reading will slow down a little bit again. Each of these chapters will be a little shorter again. So do your best to keep up, and I hope you're enjoying it. Be thinking about, right, a couple of new things. We started in with it today, the idea of hope and hopelessness, how those relate to the idea of desolation, which is a really important word that comes up in the reading for next time, the desolation of the dragon. But the meaning of desolation also relates to hope. It's when you lose hope, you're desolate, you're really downcast. Okay, so those are the themes. Some questions to think about. How do the people in Lake Town react to the dwarves' arrival? All right, does it make them again, we saw Bilbo start to change in some big ways in these last chapters. Do the dwarves start to change too? And we'll keep looking at how Bilbo is developing as a character, how his two sides, the Took, the Baggins, are coming together and connecting. Please do connect with us through signumuniversity.org/academy. Send us emails anytime. Really appreciate all your participation and hope you're enjoying following along and discussing in your groups. Again, if you have questions and ideas that come up in your discussions and your reading, send them along and we'll share them. If you make something really cool, have a cool drawing, illustration, write a really interesting journal about what you've been reading, and you want to share that too, that would be great. I know I've been trying to work on my journals. I'll try to keep going with that and see if I can come up with something that is worth reading out loud. I've certainly been enjoying all the Hobbit camp, and I'm looking forward to the next class and our next week as we'll finish up the book. All right, so chapters 10 and 11 for next time, and by this time next week, we will be coming to the end. So happy reading and enjoy the weekend. Until next time, take care.